Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. You've spent over 30 years on United Nations missions, including in conflict zones. In your view, is the lack of trust, understanding, and credibility still one of the biggest obstacles to peace today? Especially when we look at current efforts like what's unfolding around Alaska.
I think that this is the challenge of our time. I think there's no trust among people in their states. There's no trust in the European Union among their citizens. There is no trust among what politicians are doing. I mean, there's no trust in political elites. There's no trust between Russia and the others, and no trust in them, and whatever. All the things, if you negotiate in a war, you should not forget you deal with two parties who actually outside the meeting room kill each other, and this is the lowest point of trust you can have. You kill because you don't trust the other one, because you think the other one will do you harm, and therefore you have to kill this person or these people. And so trust is a very important thing. So if we always are so impatient about Istanbul talks and things like this one, I can't understand it. I mean, the biggest war I was involved in was the Iran-Iraq war, and it took the Secretary General at the time, Paris de Cuellar. It was still a real UN Secretary General. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. Who went forward and backward, and it took 3 years for them to agree on a ceasefire. It is because there is no trust. People think that if they give in the other one, it's not only what they negotiate, it's also whether what they negotiate will afterwards be kept by the other party. It is almost a more important issue. You know that when you look at the beginning of Trump talking to the Russians, and I think he did very well in the beginning. He offered them, to recognize the Crimea, to recognize that there should be no NATO and all the rest of it. It has not come to it because Putin couldn't trust that Trump will deliver on this. That's what it is. Otherwise, I think we would have had a peace a long time. He could not trust. And why he couldn't trust Trump was largely because of the Europeans, who said at the same time, oh, we just wait until 3.5 years until Trump is gone, and then we do all the things with NATO and all the rest of it again. So I think it's trust, and it's when I listen to all these academics, it's going often lost because, of course, I mean, when you sit on the table, you feel things differently when you talk to people. Trust is our biggest problem, and I think that's also why the meeting in Alaska was so important. That was a typical trust-building exercise. That's what you do when you want to create trust among people. In the end, one person has to trust the other person. One president has to trust the other president, and so on. And that's why I think this meeting was so extremely, extremely successful.
The guest calls trust the biggest casualty of our time, absent between countries and even within them. Putin didn't trust Trump not because of Trump, but because the European Union wouldn't let him deliver. War, he says, is what happens when trust is gone. The Alaska meeting mattered not for outcomes, but for restoring dialogue. Provocation. Can peace even exist if no one trusts anyone, not even within their own state? If there's no trust, can peace ever be real? Even pledges like NATO won't expand mean little if the other side doesn't believe them. For Russia, doesn't it become a binary choice? Either you trust or you take control of the territory?
The only thing is war. I mean, that's what we do now too. It is war. If we don't have trust, you only have a chance to seek a military solution. If you want to negotiate, you need trust. And that's what I think is in Alaska so important.
The mistrust goes both ways. Europeans no longer trust Russia, even when the war is clearly unwinnable. But equally dangerous is the lack of effort to understand our adversaries. No one talks about what Russia, China, or Iran are actually concerned about. We reduce them to villains or imperialists. Why has the West stopped trying to understand what its opponents truly want?
I'm not sure that I understand it, but I try to understand it. Glenn, the thing is the absence of diplomacy nowadays. No? I mean, we haven't had this even in the Cold War. I would say that we are probably today in a more dangerous situation, also because of the development of weapon systems than we were in the Cold War, because we don't have diplomacy anymore. And when you negotiate, there are three very simple issues you have to follow. The first one is you have to show respect to the other side. I mean, look how we deal with Putin, probably they with us. No respect whatsoever. The second thing is one has to start listening to the other. One has to listening. And the third one is one has to try to understand the other side. That's also for military, by the way. It's all the same. It's in our families, the same thing. If I have a conflict with my wife, I should not lose the respect. I should listen what she has and try to understand it. And understanding doesn't mean that you agree necessarily with the other side. But the moment you express that you understand the other side, you already take a lot of aggression out of a conflict. And this is a diplomatic thing. And that's actually very simple rules, very difficult to do when you are in war. But we don't follow this anymore. And that makes the situation so extremely difficult. I think we are today in a more dangerous situation even than during the Cold War. And I wanted to go back to this one because I think that's one of the success of this meeting. And but I mean, I'll leave it up to you.
Why has it become almost taboo today to even try to understand the other side's reasoning, even without agreeing with it?
We have always said the self-righteousness of each side is a fuel for war. Self-righteousness. That means you are so convinced that you're right. I mean, look at the EU proposal, these 5 points they submit there for influencing the negotiations. What is in the proposal? Again, the unprovoked, illegal, by international law, illegal war of aggression of Russia to take territory. Now, if you see the world like this one, you continue to see this for the last 3-4 years, or at least the 3 years. There is nothing to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. It is self-righteousness. We repeat all the time what we say, and that makes us blind to find a solution. And that's why Europe cannot negotiate peace with Russia at the present time.
The European Union demands to join negotiations, yet refuses to talk to Russia. At the same time, it pushes for full Russian withdrawal, territorial concessions, and Ukraine's NATO membership, even as Russia is gaining ground militarily. Is this naivete, moral self-righteousness, or part of a deliberate strategy?
Yes, self-righteousness makes you blind. I mean, it's unbelievable what happens in Europe. Unbelievable. But I think the Alaska meeting will show the limits of Europe. Europe is in a very difficult position after this one. So if you don't mind, I want to say something about the meeting because, I was just looking at news things and then not so much. And that there's a big thing, I think it was in New York Times and saying no deal reached. No, what are these? I think enormous success of this mission. And I think we should all be happy. I think the Alaska meeting is a game changer. If it's historical, I don't know, that you need more time, but it's a game changer. The meeting takes place exactly at the time where the Ukraine is at the point of military collapse. And the Ukraine must now decide, do they negotiate based on the Russian terms, because the Russians are the winners, or do they continue until they have a military collapse and possibly also as a follow-up, a political collapse in the country? And I would advise the Ukrainians, negotiate. Don't trust the Europeans. You're negotiating. You should follow the Russians and the Americans in these negotiations. There is no alternative for you if you want to save Ukraine as an independent, functioning state. You have to do that very quickly. And I'm not sure that they're ready for this one. You know, the real, when you look at what Europe has done in the last weeks, the demands, the coalition of the willing to send soldiers into so-called peacekeepers into Ukraine, Merz's insistence to buy Typhoons and sending carriers to attack Moscow, and he's going even one step further and says it will not lead to a nuclear war. If we think that NATO soldiers have helped to shoot these medium-range missiles into Russia. In Germany especially, we announced that we will have a war and we have to prepare for war with Russia in 2029. I mean, what does it sound for Russia? And interestingly, it's a year 29 because it's a year when Trump is no longer president. I mean, it's almost unbelievable what we are doing there. We talk about war. We talk about plans of taking as a revenge Kaliningrad because it's an enclave which would be easy to conquer militarily. I mean, unbelievable. It's Russian territory. And we say we would stop in international waters the shadow fleet of Russia. I mean, these are all acts of war of NATO countries. And to believe that Russia would not respond with force, including with nuclear force against them, is just lunatic. And this is what we want to do. Now, the great advantage of the Alaska meeting now is that this will not happen anymore. Europe stands now alone. It's very, very clear. Very clear. I mean, the United States will not support this type of adventurism to turn this war around and prevent that Ukraine loses the war. It will not happen anymore, and we should be very glad. And actually, for me, when I listened to the press conference, I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter, as you can imagine. I mean, not at all, actually. I mean, I thought to myself, we always say Trump, he's crazy and, unpredictable, all the rest of it. But look at our own leaders: Merz, Macron, Sturmer, von der Leyen, Rutte. I mean, compared to this one, when I look at this meeting there, Trump towers over them. I mean, we are really the crazy ones. We are the crazy ones. I mean, to think that we are on the way of provoking a nuclear war with Russia, living in Europe. I mean, we will be the first ones who would be killed. And nonetheless, that's what we do. And there will be no negotiations with Russia, no diplomatic way of trying to solve it another way. It's only to use force, threats, and to think about all sorts of ways you could now harm Russia in order to prevent a defeat in the Ukraine. I think it's absolute madness. Absolute madness. And now Trump comes out as a more reasonable person. And I think we should be grateful to this one. And I find it difficult to say at the same time. Yeah. I was also thinking that when I saw these pictures, Putin arriving in Alaska, that this meeting recognizes now Russia as a great world power. And if you think that this war started by trying to push Russia only to become at best a regional power, to take it off from the geopolitical map, and by cutting it off from the Black Sea, by bringing countries like Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova into NATO and so on, and circle it all, it has exactly the opposite effect. And that is what is happening now in Alaska is basically a recognition of the results of this war. Russia has won it. Russia will be now the strong country. European Union, who thought they could use a war to unite and to make Europe a great power at par with China and the United States, because that's really the plan of von der Leyen and these people, have failed. I mean, I wouldn't even not surprised if within the next 2 years the European Union will falter. I mean, will at least break somewhere. It will not disappear, but it will somehow break because of our policies in the war with Russia. And and the other loser is, of course, Ukraine. So what Trump really did is receiving the winner of this war. And you know how secure they were about the thing is that neither of the two sides had military brass bringing with them. So they all, in also visually, when you look at the teams that met there, you didn't have, you know, a row of generals with all their medals and things like this one. No, it's almost as the war is over. And you don't have to talk about the military things anymore. You talk now about other things, the relations with Russia. I mean, that Russia invites the US president to come to Moscow. Unthinkable. But he hasn't said no. And so I think the relations with Russia will be very important. Economic relations, they speak about the Arctic, the space, and luckily also about arms control and things like this one. So there are very important things on the plate which are beyond already the Ukraine war. So in a way, they have said, you know, the Ukraine war is something. And to this one, the second thing is that Trump didn't insist anymore on an immediate unconditional ceasefire. At least we didn't hear anything about this anymore. And that means that he recognizes that one has to discuss the root causes first. And he allows basically Russia to continue a war without, I mean, there wasn't any criticizing for this one. So also here, it's a recognition that the realities are now different. They are now different. And, you know, they have not, they probably have, or they have not, I don't know. They haven't said anything to it, whether they have really some parameters of how to end the war, what it is. But it is surely not an unconditional ceasefire, an immediate unconditional ceasefire. So I think they recognize that Russia has a claim that Ukraine should remain a neutral country. They have a claim to protect the Russian population. They have a claim to have an access to the Black Sea. This is a recognition. And Putin should go. And then the third thing is, which I think is the outcome, is that we know the United States will now withdraw from the Ukraine war, at least militarily. I mean, they have announced it many times before, and there's this interview with Vance just, I think, a week ago on Fox News. United States will not continue to supporting the war efforts of Ukraine. That means the Europeans stand now alone. And because Europeans cannot afford this war, have not the ability to escalate this war, all their plans, which I mentioned before, are basically now defunct. And I'm very happy about this, because it's just crazy. So Europe has somehow to reorient. Ukraine will have to reorient. They know now that they will not be saved by the Europeans, because Europe cannot save them. So their only options, if they act rationally, is to rush to speak with Trump and then with Putin. I mean, they have to make a deal. And I think it shouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, the territories Russia claims have been annexed to the Ukraine only in 1922. 1922. The Crimean Peninsula only in 1954. I mean, Ukraine could very well survive without these territories. It would maybe even make it a more coherent country, because it would more emphasize that Ukraine is Ukraine and not just, you know, Russia with some local dialects of Ukrainian dialect. No, that Ukraine could, I mean, Kiev will always remain a big European capital. Odessa will always remain a big port. You know, they will have Lvov, you know, looking towards the European Union, and Krakow to look towards Russia. I mean, this is still a very big country. And if they continue the war, I mean, all the young people they lose, all the people who flee their countries, I mean, the depopulation of the country, the destruction of any form of industry, of electricity, or whatever there is, you know, it's so great. I mean, if they continue the war, they will not they will not survive as a country. And there's even the risk that they lose Odessa, because the rational thing for Russia is, of course, if they don't agree to take Odessa, because then they really have decapitated Ukraine. And they should prevent it and we should all help them to end this. Europe doesn't do it because it says, oh, you have to continue the war because otherwise it's an unfair peace. But in reality, what we're doing is destroying the Ukraine.
You called the Alaska meeting a game changer. So what's next for Europe? As the world shifts toward multipolarity, the European Union still clings to the illusion of collective Western hegemony. Meanwhile, legitimacy erodes, debt surges, and even partners like India grow wary of Western pressure. Has Europe become the player who hasn't realized the game has already changed?
Of the European Union is to accept there will be a multipolar world. The only conclusions they draw from it, that in this multipolar world, they must be one of the three superpowers in the world. That's what it is. So it is already accepting that the unipolar world will not happen anymore. But that's also why we take these very aggressive attitudes, and it will not happen. I have 4 children. I have now, my 5th grandchild is coming, and I think I will end up with 9, I think, before I go in a box. So I'm very much future-oriented, and I see the future of Europe extremely bleak, because the decline of the economy which we see in Europe will accelerate. We cannot survive if we don't get along with Asia. If now Asia is cut off by Russia controlling the whole line from the Bering Sea to the Black Sea, and we think that through Armenia we have a loophole or somehow, it's completely crazy. We need Russia because of its raw materials, because of the energy, because of also the trade. We have to have access to Central Asia. We need the access to India, and we need the land bridge to China. And we do everything to block this off. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just writing a booklet on the UN Charter, because I think the UN Charter, and I'm a great defender of the UN Charter, also because I've been in so many countries with the wars. And, then you have this little booklet virtually under your pillow, because if you don't have this one, you would have no value system at all to adhere to, why there should be negotiations, why we should have peace. We in Europe have completely ignored the UN Charter. We speak about the rules-based order. This doesn't exist. The rules-based order is never recognized by any other country except in NATO countries. And for them, rules-based order means you set the rules, you do what you want, but you insist that we do other things. It is not coming. We have to go back to the UN Charter, which is greatly supported. I mean, if you look at the founding documents of BRICS, it's the UN Charter on top. Non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. And so, I mean, all these principles from the UN Charter. Where do we find it in the West? We need it much more, because for a very simple reason, the development of military systems and the speed with which they can nowadays be delivered doesn't allow wars as a solution for political conflicts. So we have to go back to the Charter, which says we should negotiate our conflicts. And we should try everything, international courts, whatever things, but all peace-building measures to prevent, because we will continue to have conflicts among states, but we should not have it to go to war. So it will be a booklet, and I will also do it in English.
Trust has collapsed between nations, leaders, and societies. No agreement holds if no one believes it will be honored. The West clings to moral superiority, refusing to understand its rivals. Europe stands alone as the United States pulls back, and Ukraine faces collapse. Alaska was a turning point, a quiet admission that the unipolar world is over. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.